Welcome to the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast, a conversation built to help you address the mess, connect the dots, and defeat addiction. Doing your work matters because if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Life is tough and we're here to help. I'm your host, Ben Derrick, and as always, I'll be joined by Roan Hunter. Let's jump right in. Roan, we're like a pet and its owner. We're turning into each other, man. It's crazy. We both have hoodies on. I've got, the readers. I don't know what's happening. I need to quit spending so much time with you. Yeah.
I guess we do. But it was good planning. I got your text that what you're wearing. Yeah, thank you. It's always good. Yes.
Yeah, a little bit of coordination goes a long way, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. This video podcasting thing, I don't know, man. I'm always worried about cameras breaking, people just just turning it off real quick. It's not good. I don't know.
It's a little nerve-wracking for sure, man. There's no doubt about it. I will say, as we're getting into our episode today, I spent some time just on Apple Podcast reading our reviews, and man, what a great experience that was. I mean, I know we talk about this every couple of episodes, but I think it's worth highlighting. There are real people out there that are listening to these episodes, especially with our guests, that the information is so helpful. We're reaching into some really broken stories, making an impact. I don't mind telling you behind mic, that feels really good.
Yeah, it really does. I always say all of this for me is kind of surreal. From the book, best-selling book, and then speaking at some of the places where we've been asked to speak, and it just again it feels very surreal. However, it's also, man, there's nothing greater, I believe, than just when you're impacting people's lives in a good way, not a bad way, hopefully. But boy, there's nothing better. I think I always say, the glory of God is a man fully alive, and being fully alive is adding life unto others, which is what the word blessed means. That's all it means. Add life to, and boy, there's just nothing better in all of life when you're actually getting to experience that with other people.
No doubt about it. And you mentioned something last episode, and I'll admit it caught me when I heard it, that moving past just trying to stop doing something and pursuing sobriety, which, let's be clear about this, we are very much for sobriety, right? We don't have any problems with that. But if it's the only thing, then there's something missing. And the way that you phrase it is a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning. And this for us is a big part of our sense of meaning, is getting outside of just maybe the one-on-ones inside of rooms and even intensives that you guys do, our coaching weekends, and being able to spread this message further than we could have ever gone 10 years ago just with digital efforts. And it is, I think, a big part of what drives you and I when we wake up in the morning is we can help more people doing things like this.
Absolutely. I think, oftentimes in recovery world and in this work around sexual brokenness, sexual addiction, the focus, I'm just going to call it clinical for lack of a better word, it becomes all about, these bad behaviors, and somehow, if I just stop doing those, then, my life is going to be good, which certainly it will be better. That's a given. However, we even talk about this on the podcast. Even the goal of this podcast is not just talking about sexual brokenness or sexual addiction or betrayal trauma or those things that, we do talk about. However, we want even this podcast to be a kind of a way for people to really understand the bigger picture. Not only in your recovery, which is recovering the life that God intended us to live, but even in understanding the culture. when it comes to sex and sexuality and what's going on in the world today, because all of these things are they have an influence on how we live our lives. And if we're not understanding the bigger picture, if we're not understanding what's going on in the world around sex and sexuality and kind of the evolution of where we are today and how we got to where we are today, and all these things that are affecting our daily lives, because those things affect the way that we think about this stuff. And the distorted thinking in all of this is such a big piece. And I'll just use, for example, I'm sitting with a couple, and then somebody is talking about, well, I'm just not in love with her anymore, or I'm not in love with him anymore. And man, I often say I want one of those, those shock collars that you put on a dog to help him learn how to not bark, right? I think I would love to outfit, somebody coming in to sit on my couch, that we're just going to, here, put your collar on for this hour. And then when you say things like that, you're going to feel this electrical charge because those types of things are just absolutely ludicrous. All that is the influence of some Hollywood romance movie or some, Hollywood, just the romance novels or movies, all this crapola that it influences the culture so greatly. And I want to, especially if we are people of some faith, and that you believe that you can walk down the street and fall in a hole and fall out of love with somebody, I want to say, man, we got a sign for you that, and I guess. I won't say it because we get grief. We get flack about the language on our podcast. I'm trying to clean. Actually, I've got Eva's voice in my ear right now. Don't say it. But it's like, man, when you think about that, and just that statement, I'm not in love with you anymore. Boy, that's just kind of a really asinine statement.
It's a pretty intricate idea there for sure, and I'm definitely aligned with what you're saying, that we don't really have a proper understanding these days about choice, commitment, loyalty. We're not saying, especially at the start of this episode, that you can't be so mad at someone that you do actually love that you want to pin them against a wall. That's that can certainly happen, male and female alike. But really where this idea impacts what's happening inside of a couple, what we see is when you get past that kind of initial success where the bad behavior has slowed down or stopped, sobriety has been pursued, and it's like, okay, well, we've checked all those boxes, but I still feel some kind of way about you. What do we do with that? And we often see that particular dynamic pulls a husband or pulls a wife, whoever's in the throes of addiction, back into that addiction, because just getting sober doesn't solve this problem that we're talking about today. And this is kind of the discussion that we've built to have, is this long-term plan. And it's why we're so heavily, even for the past 2 episodes, talking about purpose. I was sitting down on a separate podcast with a former Green Beret, Scott Mann, doing incredible things. He's the guy that actually arranged Task Force Pineapple to get interpreters and folks that were actually partner forces out of Afghanistan. His major point on that podcast was that we are meaning-seeking creatures. We have to have meaning. And I think the damnable part about addiction is that it actually becomes our purpose and our meaning. It's where we're getting meaning and validation. So this is a critical part, you would say, I think, of the long-term plan for sobriety is talking about this purpose and meaning piece, and not being so thin that you could fall out of sobriety or fall out of love as if you're some passive participant in your own life.
Yeah, if you're using statements like that, that just tells us you're probably you're pretty unaware. You're kind of clueless about life, and certainly love and relationships, and even in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The meaning piece is at the top of the pyramid. When basic needs are met, we just, as human beings, we are wired to search for something bigger, greater, better, and that's just simply purpose and vision and calling and all of these things that give us fulfillment. And so often, when I just sitting with an individual, and they don't have some type of higher calling or higher purpose in their lives, they typically are, they may be kind of sucking air and drinking water, and there may not be anything necessarily bad going on, but they're just kind of like boring. There's not much passion there, right? Because those are the things that make life worth living. And what's happened as we've gotten into our addictions is that the passions of our life have been robbed because typically we haven't dealt with our trauma, we haven't dealt with the negative life events, the painful memories, the things that have happened in our lives. And so addiction becomes a great purpose and a great meaning because it works, right? And, I just call it chasing the scream because there's a lot of emotion there, negative emotion. And certainly there are pleasurable emotions associated with this as well. We have to acknowledge that. None of us would do it if it weren't there. But when you begin to look at what's driving the acting out behavior, so often I'm chasing something that lights me up, right? And if when I stop that behavior, if I'm not backfilling it with something, greater, something with purpose and meaning and those things, I'm probably going to get pretty lifeless, and then I'm going to get bored with life. And boredom is one of the greatest triggers for going back and acting out. So this stuff is all connected, and we've got to begin to understand this idea of the 12 steps. We carry this message to others. That's the fulfillment part in this journey of where I'm beginning to offer hope to others that have no hope. And we can call that the gospel. We can call that man's search for meaning. We can call that a lot of different things, but it's just something in our human nature. It is certainly the God stamp on our soul to want to have those things in life that give us a greater purpose than just going out and buying the latest new phone or new car or whatever it is, because over time those things begin to just I'm at my age that stuff. I don't know. Yes, at one point in my life, yes, it had a lot of meaning, but at this point, I don't. Whatever. It doesn't have much meaning. There's not much significance to that because this stuff is going to pass. We are a wisp of smoke, and so you begin to get to that point in your life where I just I want to have impact. I want to influence people's lives for the good, and that's why this is all so important.
Yeah, and I do want to take a second to celebrate. I feel like even listening to you being in my mid 40s, which you clearly are not in your mid 40s, but hearing younger generations, yeah, I know. Hearing younger generations talk about this is very encouraging to me as we're around younger men. I think that sense of purpose is a little bit larger drive. I certainly didn't understand that in my 20s and early 30s. That's why I think this conversation is so very important. I'd like to kind of take a quick left, though, and talk about maybe some things at a personal level, because I feel like sometimes on podcasts we're talking about these larger drone view ideas, and it's hard for the listener to understand exactly what we mean. So I'm giving you a little bit of fair warning here. Asking you about your sense of purpose. What does that sound like for you? Can you put language around your sense of purpose right now as Roan Hunter?
Oh, yeah. And I think, for me, early on, first week, when I admitted everything to Eva, and, all hell was breaking loose. And again, I didn't admit everything all at once, but I admitted enough for her to know it was not good. And go get the book. All that part of the story's in the book. But early on, I found a Christian counselor, and I'll never forget walking out of that office. It was an office on Windy Hill Road in Atlanta, Georgia, where we lived at the time. And it was like this, there wasn't this audible voice, but I do remember feeling the sun shining on my face. And I remember this kind of, silent whisper that and I certainly believe and know it was God, saying that, I am going to use this in your life for my glory. I mean, I that sounds kind of charismatic-y or hooey-dooey or something, but I do believe that God speaks to us, and I do believe that God works and does what God will do. And so it was, and at that moment, there was I'm like, well, that's crazy. It's probably like Noah building the ark or something, There's that. Look at that guy building that ark. That's crazy. And so, but I do remember that happening, and I do think that was God's call in my life. That this very thing that I was certainly so ashamed of, and it looked like was going to be the complete end of everything in my life, my marriage, relationship with my two little baby boys at the time. And God has used that very thing for good. Even doing what I do today, doing what Eve and I get to do together. And certainly even, Ro, my son, he and I doing our work together. It's just, it is amazing how that purpose and that calling that God has used, and I believe I have been faithful to that call since that day in some way, shape, or form. And again, not, for many years, that was me and Eva really, doing our work and figuring this stuff out. Not that we've got it all figured out by any stretch of the imagination. It's still a marriage. We tell couples all the time, man, it's still a cat and a dog, living together under the same roof. I mean, good luck with that. But we have the tools and we have the ability to when we get sideways, to not let it just take us out, right? And so I think, in that, for me, that calling and that purpose was very real, and I have been faithful in living that out, and kind of being a megaphone in some way to the church and just to others along the way around this idea of recovery from sexual addiction, sexual brokenness, and certainly Eve and I together with betrayal trauma and so I guess that's one reason I'm so passionate about this, is because I've just seen how important it is to have that sense of purpose that gives you meaning to this crazy life that we live. And again, it wasn't like we just jumped out there and started, a coaching practice or a ministry or something, or, I became a pastor, or none of that. I mean, we actually spent the time doing our work in our healing journey so that hopefully we are wounded healers and not unhealed wounders. There's a lot of those out there, and those are dangerous.
Extremely, extremely. I want to say before we keep the clip of this podcast moving along, just as your friend, as your brother, and I very much respect the clarity and the vulnerability in your sharing of that answer. That's real, and I can confirm, sharing life with you over quite a few years now, that is the essence of who you are, and you actually tell men who are in crisis, this idea of purpose and mission has been essential for my long-term sobriety, which you have achieved, long-term sobriety. So you're speaking into this from experience. And I think I'd like to have a little bit, if you're okay with it, a little bit of educated discussion about these unhealed wounders, especially inside of the Christian community. I'm a member of the Christian community. I'm a proud card-carrying disciple of Jesus Christ. It's what leads me to want to call out inconsistencies and damaging behavior. But I can remember it was nearly a decade ago. We had I love how we talk about it in the church too, like a moral failure or a fall from grace. Oh. We have all this really soft language to discuss horrific things that men have done to people that are pastors, that are ministers. There are lots of great ministers out there. So if you're one of those guys listening and you're radically offended, just keep doing your great ministry. But what I'm going to call out is a guy who does incredibly abusive things to his congregation or to his wife, and then about 4.5 months later releases a book on his formula about how to conquer and all these things in his life and how to recover. And long term, that man just ends up being a joke. I will say here, and I've done a lot of investigation into this guy's healing process, Carl Lentz has been a pretty dramatic exception, I feel, to that pattern, and that he's dug in with a therapist. And, people are on this guy right now because he's got a podcast. And I don't know. I don't know the guy personally. It looks a little bit different, but there have been literally hundreds of people that have gone before him that have these huge issues that emerge in their life. And then they try to leverage that issue to lead and coach and teach other people so that they can recover financially in their life. That's not your story, and that's not Eva's story. You guys did the long slog of suffering inside of your own story, and you let God bring the purpose and the multiplication to you. I think that's why this effort has been so successful up until this point, and that it's rooted in a healthy process. It's unhealthy to have a dramatic public failure where you hurt potentially thousands of people, and then the next thing they see is your book cover on social media. We've got to stop doing that inside of Christian circles. Boy,
it is a problem because even I often say with couples, because we were there, me way before Eva was, as far as, it's like everybody that gets into recovery is like, I'm going to become a counselor, I'm going to be a coach, I'm going to become a pastor. That's just such a common thing. And I think because, when you've experienced your personal brokenness, and then, God begins to really work in that area of your life, it's like, boy, it's real, right? And then you kind of want to go tell others about it. However, it's dangerous too when you haven't done your work. We often say, nobody needs to really step out there until when it's at least a minimum of 5 years, and because this stuff that we're dealing with it's been in our lives, all of our lives, and then beginning to figure out, my trauma, beginning to understand my patterns, beginning to understand, the things, the areas of growth, my attachment issues, my inability to regulate emotions. We just keep going down the list. Not that somehow you've got to get to some perfection, but I think everybody probably listening to the podcast has seen too many examples of these unhealed wounders out there, inflicting their love on the poor people that start, wanting help, and they begin following these people, whether that's in a church, sitting under a pastor's teaching, or whether it's somebody on a podcast, or some, I don't know, radio preacher. I guess that gives away my age because we don't have those anymore.
Yeah,
but
does.
I guess some podcast preacher. How about that?
There you go.
But it's like, we start listening to somebody, and you hear it. I hear it all the time. Oh man, did you hear so and so's podcast, or did you hear so and so's sermon? Did you hear what the preacher said yesterday? Or I don't know. That stuff drives me nuts, because the thing of it is, as far as of affecting actual change, it doesn't do a bit of good. I will often, as a way of driving home this point, I will at one of our coaching weekends, I'll look at a guy and go, man, you remember that sermon from 2 weeks ago that our pastor preached, and remember that sermon and 2 weeks ago, and how, boy, it was so powerful, and how it really, and the guy's looking at me and he's kind of scratching his head going, I can't remember my name. I can't remember what I did yesterday, much less a sermon from 2 weeks ago. But I just, that just kind of speaks to the efficacy of those types of things. And the, real change is real hard. And it takes a lot of effort because I'm dealing with behavior patterns, conditioned behavior patterns over long periods of time, and how I relate to another human being, how I relate to myself, how I view myself, the distorted thinking. There's a lot of stuff there, and so to think that somehow, 3 counseling sessions and now I'm good is probably pretty dangerous. And most pastors have never even done 3 counseling sessions. I think I've asked you before, because you went to seminary. So Ben, we talk about relationship with God, relationship with Jesus, relationship. So how many courses, how much training did you get on relationship in your seminary training? Can you help us?
Yeah.
Enlighten our listeners,
Sure.
please.
Yes, it came down to 0 hours, right? I've reflected on this question
Weird.
since you last asked it. Yeah, the stuff that was happening on the spiritual development side at Baylor University when I was there at the time was pretty innovative. But if you're attaching 3 hours to you learned this thing about relating, or you learned this thing about the addiction cycle, and you're going to have 70+% of the people in your congregation are going to be addicted, so you need to know this. Also, here's how to handle the first step in a crisis, and then refer someone to a therapist. None of that was going on. I didn't get any of it, and I had to kind of educate myself as a pastor on how to do those things. And thank God, and I mean that very directly, thank God I was pushed into a relationship in the masculine community here in Central Mississippi, which isn't that completely like God? We're only first in the worst things in Mississippi, but here in Central Mississippi, there are men that are flying in from all over the country. and men who have been involved with this work for a really long time that are saying, we've never seen anything like this. And I feel like he's using the least of these, I think, to really shake awake our country, actually. But I do want to address real quickly, as a former pastor, we're often kind of taking shots at the church, and I actually love doing that. I think it's fun. There's a lot of truth mixed in there, but I think as far as my purpose is concerned, just to answer that very briefly, I gave up sermonizing. Man, I love to write a sermon. You know this about me. I love to write a sermon. And also, I'd like credit that as a pastor, I came to see you, and I remember that office that you're sitting in right now, you were bracing across the coffee table like, what sort of mess has Ben Derrick gotten himself into that he's sitting in this office right now?
Here's really another one. Yeah.
Here's another one. The essence of the mess, though, is that I started to realize as I started to do my own work, I am just slinging words off a stage, and they're hitting the back wall, but they're missing the men. It's not making a long-term impact. And then, especially as I paced through COVID as a pastor, I realized I've been sermonizing inside of this church for a very long time, and I don't see the evidence of maturity in this congregation. And in a lot of ways, that's my fault, because I have trusted this model way too much. And that's a lot of what loosened my grip on the Western church model and got me into what we're doing today, what we get to experience together, that sense of purpose. It really pulled me off of a very difficult ledge. What people didn't see, and when I say publicly, I mean in my very, very small community. I wasn't anything special, but I did have a platform every week. What people didn't see is me crying in my office in my garage because I didn't understand why I felt so empty. What they didn't see is me taking long naps on my days off because I was just trying to escape the feelings that I was having at the time, while still trying to gear up and stand up on a stage on Sunday and say something cognitively impressive, knowing that there are addicted men in my congregation, that this 27-minute sermon isn't going to move the needle one bit. And it was driving me crazy. Now, there are guys that they really love doing that, and they are making an impact on the people that they have relationship with. But I realized when I was having to make an appointment with the pastor and it was 2 months down the road before I could see him, something's broken here. This isn't going to be a relational paradigm that's actually going to matter. So, there have to be things in our life that are infusing us with purpose. Very clearly, a sermon's not going to do that. Very clearly, as Trey Lovern said a couple of episodes ago, the men's pancake breakfast, that's not going to do it. So I'd love to take some time here in this episode to answer, well, what is going to do it? And before the listeners have to sit through this again, certainly connection is the cure. That we're going to talk about connection, but what does that actually look like, putting things in your life that infuse your life with you beginning to understand your purpose?
Well, and oftentimes, and I think it's just, another, again, it just sounds like we're picking on the church, but it's easy because I don't know where else you go, and these types of things are maybe being talked about as far as a vision, a purpose, or something. And so, it's like we've got to go do some great thing, or we've got to go, I don't know, save the children in Africa, which God bless the children in Africa. However, maybe my purpose is just really figuring out how to love my wife well. Maybe my purpose is figuring out how to create safety when I have been unsafe in the relationship with her. Maybe my purpose is helping heal the betrayal trauma that I've caused. I don't know. But those are mighty, mighty great purposes. Those are great things because so many people, so many marriages, they kind of suck. And maybe the goal is, hey, we want to really have the best marriage that we could possibly have on this side of heaven. And and that's going to take a lot of work. That's going to take a lot of intentionality. But maybe that's the great purpose. Maybe the purpose is, man, I want to be the best father that I can be. You know, I've gotten busted. I've gotten caught. I've admitted all my sexual brokenness, and then my wife decided that she could not deal with it, and now she has divorced me, which is certainly an option in this arena. There's no doubt, and that may be the case. But maybe rather than me going out there and trying to find another woman, maybe I just want to focus on being the best father that I can be to my 10 and my 12-year-old, or my 15-year-old, or my 3-year-old. I don't know, but instead of going and getting into another relationship, I'm just going to work on being the best dad that I could be to those little ones that have suffered as a result of my sin and the consequences of that. But boy, I'm going to really make that my priority. And you know what? I might figure out that I can live. I can be okay without a woman. I might be able to be a celibate, single Christian man. Maybe that's your calling. Paul talks about that. So, there's a lot of ways we could skin this cat as far as, what is your purpose? What is your calling? What does God, have in store for you? But I think part of it, I've got to begin to get in alignment with certainly God's will for my life. And that one's pretty simple, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Wow. What if that was my purpose? What if that was my mission? And so, again, this I think in church world, sorry to the people that are not a part of that. Actually, maybe you should be thankful if you're not. Gosh, I did it again. I'm sorry. Yes, I hear Eva's voice in my ear. But
that's good.
But
that's good.
Yeah, I need that. My handler. I need my handler. But maybe it's just simply, it's not some grandiose thing that I've got to go, win all these people to Jesus or whatever that means. Maybe it's just as simple as, God has called me to be a faithful man, a faithful husband, a faithful father, and to live that out and learn to be content and reasonably happy, as the Serenity Prayer says, in this life. And so, I think we get sucked into some kind of grandiosity that the church is terrible about telling people that they is some big grandiose thing, when the reality of it is it may just really be simple, and it may be right in front of me. Instead of being discontent about my lot in life, maybe my purpose is to learn contentment right where I am.
The part that's so scary right now is that you're making so much sense.
Oh gosh. Yeah, pigs are flying. Yeah, something radical is happening. Yeah.
So when I sit with guys, especially if they're a religious male, I look at them and I say, I just need a commitment from you that there are two things that you are not going to purchase in the next 3 years. I'm like, okay, that's kind of a long-term commitment. I say the two things are an engagement ring. You're not going to buy one of those in the next 3 years.
Yes.
And you're not going to buy a plane ticket for a short-term mission trip. You're not going to spend money on either one of those things.
Here we go.
And then if they fight me on it, I say, okay, the money that you're going to spend on the short-term mission trip, point that toward your therapy. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, then actually send the money to the location with the people that are going, because some men are healthy and they feel the experience of God saying, I would like you to go experience another part of the world and see what I'm doing across the world. Witness it, participate in it. I didn't say go over there and Americanize and save them. I didn't say that. You just send the money with them and you spend time with yourself learning how to be a healthy, disciplined man. One of my favorite books out there, and it's an old one, is by Eugene Peterson, and it's called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. I feel like if we could have, even if we could just 2x the amount of men in America that are believers, that are disciples of Jesus, that say, you know what my purpose is? My purpose is to have a long obedience in the same direction towards my wife. My purpose is to have a long obedience in the same direction towards fathering my daughter, fathering my son, if I have multiple especially. My purpose is to have a long obedience in the same direction to obey the thing that God told me 5 years ago that I really haven't gotten started yet. I don't need another sermon to tell me exactly what God's already communicated to me. And I'm telling you, I'm getting fired up about it because I sit with men who do live this way, and they are so inspirational. I want to be like them. I want to wake up every day and show up for what God is calling me to do, infused with a sense of purpose that is no longer bastardized by programming inside the church or the grandiosity of culture. What would it be like if I were to live, this is ironic, isn't it, that we're on a podcast and videoing ourselves to show across the whole world. But this isn't, I will say very publicly, this is not the most significant work that I do in the course of a day. The most significant work that I do is making eye contact with my wife and having discussions with my sons about the realities of what it means to be a man in culture today. Those are not sexy things. It's not going to sell books. It won't get podcast downloads. But what you're saying, and I completely agree with you today, which we should probably mark that down. We're definitely in alignment here.
Make a note.
Make a note that this sense of purpose is most often going to be much more quiet than you've been sold to believe. Would you say that?
Oh, 100%. When you first started, I thought you were going to say, I tell a guy 2 things, do not spend money on. I thought you were going to say, the Purpose-Driven Life book or the 5 love languages. So, but you didn't. You could have. Yeah, nothing against Rick Warren, Purpose-Driven Life. Rick, if you're listening, we want you to come on the podcast. Love your work. But again, it's just, it's like this idea, I think even in that title, and again, it's a great book. That's what came to my mind. I'm twisted. But it's this idea that I've got to go do some great thing. And I think about, other, the prayer of Jabez, that book that made the rounds, which is another, that book, again, I don't want to say it's terrible, but it speaks to this idea of like some kind of great undertaking or whatever. And man, I just think it creates a lot of discontentment and dissatisfaction when one of the goals in our Christian faith is learning contentment and learning to be okay with where we are, no matter the circumstances in my life, that I could live in the way, as Jesus called it, of just love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, all those good things that are all internal and not external. And that's part of the problem with our addictions is we've been chasing some kind of external validation rather than figuring out my internal life and how that works. And every one of the patriarchs of our faith, in some way, shape, or form, they all said, the journey to God is an inward journey. And so maybe I've got to become more contemplative. I've got to become going more inward instead of some outward act of service or, I don't know, building a church, planning a church, going on the short-term mission trip, whatever it is, all of those things that are in and of themselves not necessarily bad things. Maybe they are. I don't know. we could debate that. But at the same time, it's like, man, maybe the focus needs to be more kind of in a micro way instead of a macro way when it comes to this kind of God thing and how this works in our lives.
We're skipping steps, I think. I mean, the biblical narrative even talks about this. I'm going to give you a little, and then you'll be trusted with more. And then when I can trust you with that, I'm gonna trust you with more. And I think I want to push against kind of the blog mindset or the social media mindset. You know, swipe and we can get 5 steps to purpose. Here's how you find purpose. I've found in my life that really the only way to discover purpose is to put myself in front of 2 things, to put myself in front of God so that he can reveal to me, because he does love us that way. He promises, if you're looking for me and you're looking for me at a heart level, you will find me. So I believe God reveals purpose to us as a Christian man. I firmly believe that. I also believe that I've got to put myself in front of other men that have already taken that inward journey. And they're not going to give me 3 steps or 4 steps or 5 steps. I'm going to engage with their story, and I'm going to ask these men. And I do this. It sounds very childlike, but Jesus also said that you're going to need to be like a child and learning new things. I sit in front of men like you and a myriad of other guys that have gone through the deer camp process, and I say, tell me a story. Please tell me a story. There's something in that story that I'm going to be able to learn how you did this, how you have achieved this. It isn't a sermon. I've traded sermons for stories. I want to hear the story of how you as a believing man or believing woman, I think like gender is the best place to start. There are women out there who have taken the journey inward, and women can put themselves in front of. In fact, there's a group that meets here locally on Monday nights, of all places at a church. And They sit with other women who have taken that inward journey. These are 2 extremely valid resources. The point I'm trying to make in a long-winded way is this isn't going to be quick. It's not going to be bullet points or step 1, step 2, step 3, and I've arrived, and let me start an Instagram live and let everybody know about my journey over the past 2 weeks to health. It just takes a very long time to figure out the nuance of adopting purpose in your story.
Oh, absolutely. All this stuff, it didn't happen overnight. We didn't get to where we got to overnight. And again, just from a Christian standpoint, I think I always hesitate when I say that word. I always just want to say from a Jesus standpoint, because even that word, I mean, we could talk about that. That has a lot of different meaning to a lot of different people, and most people have no idea what it means. But when we talk about Jesus, we just talk about Jesus, right? He was real. He offered us a model. He showed us the way. He told us the way. And so maybe we should just pay attention to what he said and what he modeled when he walked this earth. And man, he spent time walking around, hanging out, certainly with 12 dudes, very intentionally. And then, a lot of others that began to kind of see and hear and experience, wow, there's something different. And if we were all, kind of moving in that direction of becoming like him, living the way that he offered, boy, there's probably a lot of people that would kind of go, man, there seems to be something different about the way that guy's kind of doing his life. I want some of that. And so maybe that is the purpose and that is the meaning of just really kind of getting your act together, beginning to figure out what life's all about. And like I said earlier, beginning to love your wife well. And then as a couple, it's so important for a couple to begin to have meaning and purpose together. Doctors John and Julie Gottman, they have their the Safe Relationship House. And at the top of that house is meaning and purpose as a couple. And even I talk about it with couples all the time. It's one of the things that you need again, there's a lot of work to do to have a sound relationship house. I think I said safe relationship house, but that's what it is. And you've got to do your individual work, and then as a couple, you're going to get to this place where, what are we about as a couple? And again, that may be, we just want to love our children well. We want to raise them differently than what we grew up in. We want them to experience life differently than growing up in dysfunction and chaos. Holy cow, you talk about a great calling. If you just are raising children in a functional household, that is a huge and wonderful purpose, because that's rare these days. And so, all of this stuff is important in our long-term recovery.
To learn more about what you've heard today and to engage with the Sex, God, and Chaos team, visit sexgodchaos.com.